Shabbat Shalom, and good evening to you, everyone. I want to apologize in advance because you will be hearing firecrackers in the background here in East Oakland from folks celebrating other people's holidays. Okay, so excuse me on behalf of my neighbors in advance. Shabbat Shalom here from the West Coast, and happy Juneteenth to you all. I want to drop a quick video discussing a couple of the finer points of this week's parsha. This week's portion of the Torah is called Chukot. Okay, Chukot. A chok is a regulation or a decree given by the Most High, and in a lot of cases, it won't always make sense to human beings. We can't figure out the whys behind them, but that's not what's important. He said it. Let's do it, and that's what matters. Three ways that I would sum up this portion. I would sum it up with three phrases, and the three phrases are as follows. Speak to the rock, confess to the rock, and he will give you of his waters. Number two, look up and live. And finally, last but not least, clothe yourself or put on the Mashiach. Put on the Mashiach. Let's start in chapter 20 of this week's Torah portion from Sefer Bamidbar, also known as Numbers. And of course, you know the backdrop. In the backdrop, Moshe and Aaron are told to speak to the rock. Okay? We know after reading that the rock was struck twice, and the rock yielded its water nonetheless. I want to take you to two key verses to establish this thought and then move from there. Those two verses would be chapter 20, verses 12 and verse 13. After being told to speak to the rock, and Moshe struck the rock, even though the waters yielded from the rock, here's what the Most High, Yehovah, says to Moshe in verse 12. Vayomer Yehovah el Moshe ve'el Aharon Ya'an lo ha'emantem bi lehakdisheni le'inei bnei Israel. Ya'an lo ha'emantem bi lehakdisheni. You did not believe in me to sanctify me before the people. So I don't know how you've ever taken this event, or how you viewed whatever the transgression was, or whatever you thought it was that was wrong that both Moshe and Aharon did. But it's not important what we think. We have to look at the response of the Most High. And the Most High looked at their transgression, their failure to listen to and follow the exact instructions of his mouth. He viewed that as them failing to sanctify, lehakdish, okay, to sanctify or set apart his name before, la'inei ha'am, before the people. Okay, before the people. Then verse 13, notice what happens in verse 13, or what he says in verse 13. He goes on to say this. Hema me meriva asher ravu v'nei Israel et Yehovah vayikadesh bam. These are the waters of strife. Me meriva or meriba. These are the waters of strife, which what? The people quarreled with and or rebelled against Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So you're thinking, wait a minute, it says that they, at the beginning of chapter 20, that the people gathered up and they rebelled against Moshe and Aharon. But you see, there's a parallel. When people rebel against the individual and or the committee that the Most High puts in charge to guard the souls of the people, okay, and or to lead them, he views rebellion against them as directly being in a rebellion against him. Now, I know alarm bells are going off in your head because people in current times and in past times have created cults and X, Y, and Z by paralleling themselves with the Most High. I'm not speaking about the Jim Joneses and the David Koreshes and all of these other things. Okay, I'm speaking in this immediate context, okay? So, Speak to the rock. Speak to the rock, and he will give you of his waters. Why do I say it like that? Don't worry, it's not a manipulation or an extrapolation of the text. I'm going to read that little piece to you at the beginning of chapter 20 of what the Most High says. And that's exactly how it reads in Hebrew. Now, keep in mind, the Hebrew word for rock, selah, is a masculine noun. Yes, okay, so it therefore will be modified with masculine pronouns like him, his, or it, okay? And here's what the Most High said in chapter 20, starting at verse, let's go back up to verse number 7. And verse 8, the Most High says, take the staff, or your staff, okay, before all of the people, all right? And he says, you along with Aaron Achicha, Aaron your brother, and here's the part, pay attention. Vedibartem el hasela, and both of you speak to the rock, not just Moshe, but vedibartem el hasela le'einehem, before the eyes of the people. And here's the wording here. Venatan meimav, and he will give you of his waters. What does my mind go to? My mind goes to Yeshua standing up on the stone steps of the temple in Yerushalayim, and they are pouring the water down the stone steps. The ceremony, the ritual ceremony of water. And Yeshua, at the height of this celebration, with all of the eyes of Jerusalem there, and the important wannabe religious leaders in X, Y, and Z, and above the noise of the crowd, he shouts out, oh, all of you who are thirsty, come to me and drink. Paralleling himself with Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 55. Oh, let everyone who is thirsty come and drink, right? Come and drink. The stone which the builders rejected, Eben Ma'asu Habonim Haita leRosh Pina, it has become the head of the corner. The stone that was hewed out of the mountain came down and destroyed the kingdoms of the world. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, Shaul tells us that Jesus, or Yeshua, was that rock. They drank from that same spiritual rock, and the rock was Mashiach. Okay, in classic first century Midrashic terms, he did so. Second point, okay, so speak to the rock, first point, speak to the rock, confess to the rock, and he will give you of his waters. Point 2, look up and live. In this parasha, people were bitten by snakes, and the Most High commanded Moshe to craft a nechash nechoshet, a bronze serpent, and place it on a nes, and hold it up before the people. And those who had been bitten by snakes because of, again, their disobedience and their rebellion, they would live by looking up at it. Yeshua says, if I, like the serpent in the wilderness, is lifted up high above the earth, I will draw all men to me. Okay, again, paradoxes in there. What was it? Was it a snake, really? Or was it a seraph? Is it a nechash nechoshet or a saraf? Does it have something to do with a flame? Again, have to study Hebrew to get these answers. I'm only here to tease you when it comes to certain things like this, okay? Place it on a nes. What is a nes? Nes is literally the Hebrew word that means a miracle, right? But it also means a pole, okay? A pole or a post. What is a nes? A miracle is something that's high up for everyone to see, and it draws people, okay? Yehuah Nisi, he is my banner. Nisi and Nes, same word, okay? Nes, banner, or post or pole. Nisi, my banner, okay, or my post. All right. The second point. Are we at the second point? Yes. Hurry up here, David. No, with the third and final point. The third and final point is put on the Mashiach. Put on the Mashiach, as we are admonished to do so by the Apostle Paul. Put on the Mashiach. How do we put on the Mashiach? Well, it brings me to the very human part of this parasha, or of this Torah portion. Because if you keep in mind, there are a lot of paradoxical or enigmatic things within this parasha. The para aduma, the red cow and its ashes, okay? How it cleanses one, but the one who handles the ashes becomes unclean by cleaning other people. On and on and on and on. Okay. Also the serpents biting the people and the healing and the whole shebang. And it was a rough section of time for Moshe in that he lost both Miriam, his sister, and Aharon died. And that's where I want to take you here to close this out, okay? To close this out, if we look in chapter 20, starting in verse 25, pretty much at the end of this reading, chapter 20, verse number 25, it chronicles the death of Aharon. It chronicles the death of Aharon because of the disobedience, right? Now, in my past military experience, we were always taught that you can commit a crime or trespass against the individual. But ultimately, it is the office and the uniform that had to be respected. Is it the man that makes the clothing, or is it the clothing that makes the man? Well, you had to respect that uniform and the office, and also the one who gave the authority to that individual, okay? And this is very telling in this. In verse 25 of chapter 20, in closing here, it says here that, okay, Kach et Aharon ve'et Elazar beno ve'ha'al otam hor hahar. Take Aharon and his son Elazar and take them to the top of Mount Hor. Verse 26, V'hafshet et Aharon et begadav v'hilbishtam et Elazar beno ve'Aharon yasef umet sham. The death of Aharon was very, very matter of fact to me, very businesslike, and I felt, like it was, in a lot of ways, it was really cold-blooded. Now, I'm not questioning the Most High. This is my humanity speaking here in seeing how businesslike and matter of fact Aharon's death was. Take Aharon and his son up to the top of Mount Hor. Strip the clothing, the priestly, sacred, kadosh, holy garments off of Aharon and dress his son Elazar, okay? Aharon was huge, even though he made lots of boo-boos. But he is the first one in the Torah, whether you realize it or not, that is called HaKohen HaMashiach. HaKohen HaMashiach. He was called the anointed Messiah. First one called the definite article Messiah in the whole of the Torah. And yet, business is very matter of fact when it comes to his death. The clothing had to be stripped, keep in mind, the clothing had to be stripped off of Aharon before he passed away, because if he died with the clothing on him, then the sacred and holy clothing would therefore be profaned. So the clothing was taken off. In biblical context, nakedness or being uncovered has always been associated with shame, and the people saw and feared what had happened, okay? And the Most High was glorified. He was glorified. You remember I told you, or that I quoted to you, or read to you, what the Most High said in chapter 20, verse 12. You did not believe in me to sanctify me before the people. After the death of Nadav and Avihu in chapter 10, verse 3 of Leviticus, he said something very simple, and I wrote it down here. Chapter 10, verse 3 of Leviticus, the Most High said, Bikrovai ekadesh, in my midst, or in the midst of all of you, I will be sanctified. Ve'al pnei kol ha'am ekaved. And before the faces of all the people, I will be honored. He is holy. He is holy. There is none like him, no one beside him, nothing close, nothing that can be compared to him. As far as the east is from the west, the north is from the south, the heavens is from the earth, he will be sanctified. And the lesson that's to be taught here, you guys, is this. In our obedience, he will be sanctified. Even in our disobedience to him, in the end, he will be sanctified. And this is why he said what he said in verse 13 of chapter 20. Even though he had just told them in verse 12 that you did not believe in me to sanctify me before the people, in verse 13 he follows up and he says, Hema me meriba asher ravu bnei Israel et Yehovah vaykadesh bam. These are the waters of quarreling, me meriva. And he said, in those waters, vaykadesh bam, he was still sanctified in those waters. How? People saw the death of Aharon, that he had expired. They used the colorful word gavah, that he had expired. So they feared the Most High, and he was still sanctified even in their disobedience. It's better to do it the right way. To obey is better than sacrifice. I have to leave you on a high note. I have to, you guys, because he is the Elohim of life, of the living, and of hope. And it is his will that we have the best things. It is his will that we would be blessed and live fruitful lives. I will leave you with Isaiah chapter 61, verse 10. This is in connection with the words of the apostle, or the Shaliach Shaul, when he says, put on Christ. Put on the whole armor of Elohim, as we've read in other places. The Greek word there is indiasaste. Indiasaste. Put on, or to clothe oneself. Isaiah chapter 61, verse 10. Check this out. Sos asis ba'adonai, tagel nafshi be'elohai, ki hilbishani bigdei yesha, me'il staka ya'atani. So sos asis ba'adonai. Rejoice, I will rejoice in Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. Tagel nafshi be'elohai. My soul will exult in my Elohim. Ki hilbishani. Because he has dressed me, bigdei yesha, Yud, Shin, Ain, Yeshua. He will dress me in salvation. Okay? Me'il is a cloak. Me'il tzedakah sounds like sidkenu, yeah? Tzedakah. Me'il tzedakah ya'atani. And with a cloak of righteousness, he will gird me. So, put on Yeshua, put on the Mashiach, walk as he walked, keep the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. Yield fruit in your life that is worthy or indicative of a regenerated life that has made tshuva, Yield that fruit. Talking about commandments and keeping them and how well I do them in X, Y, and Z, it's nothing. If I don't have the proper kavanah in doing so, and if I don't yield the fruit that is pleasing to the Most High, and that will draw men. Again, it's not about you and I. It never has been. It is ultimately about him. Yehovah. It is about the Most High, and it is about his Mashiach, who he is using as a nes, as a rallying point, as a miracle, as something to be held up before the people that will draw men to him, and he will in turn point to the one that sent him. Okay, to the one that sent him. So with that, as always, I leave you with Shavua Tov. May your week be good and sweet. Maybe, hopefully you can carry a little bit of the sweetness of the Shabbat with you and the Aaronic benediction. Yivarechecha Yehovah ve'yishmarecha. Ya'er Yehovah panav elecha. Yisa v'yichonecha. Yisa Yehovah panav elecha ve'yasim lecha shalom. May Yehovah watch over you, guard you, and keep you. May Yehovah lift his face upon you and be kind and merciful to you. May Yahuwah lift his countenance upon you and give you his shalom. Be whole and be well, you guys. Love you and see you soon.